Welcome to Idaho State Police Forensic Services. Today we're going to host you on a tour of our Meridian facility. We hope that you learn something as we talk to our scientists about what they do in forensic science. So we're here at the DNA section of the laboratory, and we're here with the laboratory manager, who is also a qualified DNA analyst, and we're going to have her give us a little bit of a tour of the facility.
All right, we'll head on in. The state lab is the only DNA lab in the state of Idaho. The DNA unit accepts cases in all types of crimes: homicides, sexual assaults, burglaries, aggravated assaults, missing person. The evidence can range from clothing, bedding, swabs from crime scenes, to firearms, to actual human remains.
One of the issues that's come up in our state recently is processing of sexual assault kits. Can you tell us a little bit about how that process goes?
A sexual assault kit is a box that contains swabs collected from victims of sexual assault. When the box comes in, the analysts note the packaging, whether it was sealed. They actually examine every single swab that's collected in that kit. Take a cutting of every swab and test for male DNA. Then it's forwarded for DNA analysis. If the victim is female and the perpetrator is suspected to be male, they perform what's known as Y-screen, essentially looking for male DNA on all of those items. This is a much more sensitive process, which allows us to identify more samples than we were previously looking for body fluids on those samples, which was more time-consuming. DNA analysis is a multi-step process. The first step is an extraction process, breaking open the cell to get the DNA out and separating the DNA from all of the other components that are within our cells. The different chemistries we use are very expensive. They are proprietary. We have to put a lot of time into validating them, making sure they work as they say they're going to work, that we are getting the correct profiles from samples. The next step is the quantitation step, determining how much DNA is present, and that's used really to optimize the downstream process. The chemistry we use determines the amount of DNA and the amount of male DNA, which lets us know if there's any male DNA in the sample. We have a target amount of DNA we're shooting for in each sample, and we will dilute or concentrate the sample to meet that as closely as possible. It then goes on to a capillary electrophoresis instrument. It produces what's called an electropherogram, determining an individual's DNA profile, and it's a graph of peaks. We look at several different locations within a person's DNA, and at each different location they will have one or two peaks. The peaks are what they received from their parents. A single sample to run through the process, because it has to be accompanied by multiple controls, whether you're running one sample or 100 samples, I would estimate to be about $1,000 to $1,500 per sample. An analyst could produce that profile in as little as 2 days. We batch samples. This allows us to be more efficient. The batch process for an entire group of samples takes about a week. The DNA casework section accepts evidence from active criminal investigations. The DNA database unit processes samples collected from convicted felons in the state of Idaho. Any person convicted of a felony must submit a sample to the DNA database unit, and that's solely the responsibility of this section of the lab. The goal of the DNA database is to generate investigative leads. A convicted offender sample may hit to an evidence sample from a case with no suspect, and that would give the agency a name, someone they can investigate and look into. Our database unit is actually 2 people that process all of the samples on the shelves all around me. These are all of the samples in the state of Idaho for DNA database entry. These are samples collected from a single individual who we know who the sample is from. We're just developing a DNA profile from them to enter into the DNA database. Those samples are collected at the time an individual is convicted, and we maintain those samples indefinitely. The National DNA Database is most commonly known as CODIS, Combined DNA Index System. We upload all of our offender samples to our state database, typically within a week. If they also meet the criteria for the national database, they will be uploaded to that as well.
One of the misconceptions potentially about a forensic science laboratory is that CODIS, or the Combined DNA Index System, is a large laboratory. And in our laboratory and in all laboratories, CODIS is merely a computer workstation where it's networked in to national databases.
The state of Idaho is actually who determines what samples can go into the database, not the laboratory. Our legislature actually determines that. The processing is somewhat different. Samples are processed through what's called direct amplification. We skip straight to the step of preparing that sample to run on our instrumentation to develop the profile. The samples are collected differently. They're put on a special type of paper that allows for long-term room temperature storage where the DNA does not break down. We did have a serial rapist who was identified through hits in the database. This person had committed crimes in different jurisdictions, and they did not know their cases were related until they hit against each other in the database. We also have solved cases for other states. So their unsolved crimes have hit against convicted offenders in the state of Idaho, and it has assisted other states in closing out their cold cases. Another thing our DNA database analysts do is a thumbprint comparison. Every DNA database card has a thumbprint on it, verifying that the name on the card is the person who provided that sample. But it also allows for someone's criminal history to be flagged. If they are suspected in a crime, an agency can quickly determine if they already have a sample here and are already in the database. When I first started at the laboratory, the only samples that qualified for entry into the DNA database were from violent crimes. And then Idaho went to all convicted felons. Other states have wider convictions. Some will allow samples from those convicted of a misdemeanor. Many states allow for entry of arrestees. In order to fully train someone fresh out of school, typically takes about a year to a year and a half's experience in a forensic lab before they can do independent casework.
Thank you for joining us on our tour of Idaho State Police Forensic Services. We hope that you learned something and found it informative. We hope that you learned of our commitment to sound science and serving the citizens of the state of Idaho.